Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection. It's your weekly public affairs program here on Catamount Radio. I'm Brian Collamore and host the show each and every Sunday, and we're happy to have you with us today. We talk every week with community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and political arenas. And our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. And we're looking forward already to the 179th fair coming up in August of 2025. And we're happy today to welcome in Rutland City Police Chief Brian Kilcullen and a good old friend of mine who I just saw the other day, Matt Prouty. And it's been a while, I think, since we had, I don't think you've ever been on, Matt, but I know the chief has been on with Officer Rosario from time to time, but it's probably been a good month and a half or 2 months, I think.
Sure, it's been a little while.
So welcome in, and we'll talk for the next 55 minutes or so about some of the issues that obviously you folks face all the time. And I know you probably, not that you memorized the Rutstat situation, but you can probably talk about the tendencies of our community and how they're headed. We have had a little bit of, I don't know if you want to call it consolidation, but we have fewer people, I think, in the hotels and motels in the area. And yet there are people that are talking about extending the benefits for those folks until June. So we had sort of a stop in place, and it isn't a full stop, is what I'll say. And, of course, we have, and we're recording this show, by the way, folks, on the 27th of January. It will air on Sunday, February 2nd. So tomorrow, the 28th, and by the time you hear this, it'll already have happened. We have the budget address from the governor. And in that, I'm sure there will be other provisions regarding our homeless situation and whether that's getting better or worse and how we're going to deal with it in the future. We just did go through a fairly long period of time of, very cold temperatures. You don't ever want to see somebody out in the cold trying to make do. It's warmed up a little bit lately, but now I hear this week is also going to be kind of cold. So anyway, I'll open the microphones for either of you to kind of grab the football and run down the field.
Sure. Well, thanks, Brian. You mentioned Rutstat, so for your listeners who aren't familiar with that process, we meet every 2 weeks at the department, not just with our employees, but and our staff, but with our partners as well, community partners as well. And what we do is we highlight any address in the city we've been to at least 3 times, and we try to identify what the underlying issues are that are bringing us to that particular location. And the idea is to bring some stability to that address, all right? So we look to identify what the issues are and look to identify the appropriate services that can bring some stability to not just that household, but to the community, to the neighborhood. And so over the last several weeks, our analytical capability has been somewhat limited because our analyst has been deployed with the Guard. So he's thank him for his service. But as I said, so our capability has been somewhat limited. But you mentioned the hotels, and so I couldn't tell you whether or not they would show up on a three-peat location right now. But certainly over a number of years, they've been on our three-peat locations. They've shown up on during our Rutstat meetings. So some of this conversational and some of the basis for it will be anecdotal, as I said, because our analytical capability is somewhat limited. But and Matt might be able to speak better to it because much of his division deals directly with, I think, some of those who have been able to avail themselves of the services at the hotels. But over time, the hotels have kept us extremely busy. The cold weather has things quieted down somewhat, I think. As I said, a lot of this is anecdotal, but we still have some challenges at the hotels. The numbers are way down. I couldn't tell you the exact numbers, but the numbers are down, and the calls to the hotels are down over time. So that's good news. Again, I don't know where everyone's gone. I can tell you that we do see more individuals that are out of the hotels that tend to be out in the streets more. We have identified different encampments on occasion. So I think some have, are staying in tents. We try to move them along as best we can because it tends to create some health issues. Now, there are a lot of issues associated with with this issue, but what we've seen is the concern is with the health aspect of this whole issue, and so we try to minimize the encampments because they do tend to create some health issues. And so Matt maybe can talk about what his team is doing in terms of dealing with some of the health issues in the community with this population.
Sure.
So, we have the CRS program, Brian, which is our community resource specialist. We have 3 of them. And, they're non-sworn positions with, their strength is sort of on the social work side. And they work with a lot of folks on the street that are, we have folks that have some pretty serious challenges with their mental health who may have a place to stay, but because of where they're at with their state of mind, they're refusing to go into that space. And, so we're trying to, bridge that gap between the person on the street, maybe their case management. Vermont has some challenges when it comes to being proactive with that population. And so you have a lot of rights. If you're a mental health client, one is not taking your medication, and so big challenge for us. But we have the cold weather exception. We have been able to get some folks off the street into the shelter or into one of the hotels, and then from there, the hope is we stabilize it, and then we continue to do the wraparound piece. We do have some folks staying outside. We between the outreach care team, which is separate from my CRSs. Those are folks with the Rutland Free Clinic, Community Care Network, Turning Point. We try to touch base with folks, keep people alive, until we can get to a better circumstance. We've been able to get some folks to 2 of the governor's family shelters. I've transported one up to, I think it's in Waterbury, the old armory up there, which was great, but we are still not without challenges.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's a whole group of people in different agencies and, social or nonprofits that are trying their best to get people housed. I often wonder whether our structure would be better if there was like one body that sits over a whole bunch of these agencies to sort of help direct it, but it seems like that's not going to happen. We've got different people working on it, and some with great success. I don't discount the hard work that a lot of those people are doing, but it is an interesting situation, that at one time, according to the stats I saw, we had about 50 households at one time pre-COVID that depended on services like this, and then it ballooned to 300 or 400 for a while, and it really has never come back down. And the perception on the part of some is that a lot of people moved into, I'll just say, the area. Some of them were from other parts of Vermont, but there was others, I think that, or there were others that came from other states, and so I think we still have sort of that issue on the table. But again, you don't want to ever see anybody struggling, and you want to reach out. One of the criticisms I've had with respect to what we have as a program with these hotel and motels is we never made it a requirement that they reach out for the support services which were available. They were able to come in and just sort of take up residence with no particular plan on how to get back on their feet. So I think that's a work in progress too.
Absolutely, yeah. We saw situations where, recently, like within the last couple of months, and we'll get too narrow down the time frame too much, but I have an individual that's here from Mississippi, and right into the very limited capacity we have is now in one of the hotels, and that's frustrating. We're trying to house folks that have, over a long period of time, and now we do have folks that are still coming in from out of state. So that's frustrating. But the other thing that we're doing is, listen, it's not uncommon to find someone that actually does have a place to live and also gets a voucher. So there's so when I find that, some folks have set up maybe they're setting up for a drug dealer or something like that. We're letting the agency of human services know through backdoor channels, like, hey, listen, this person has a place to live. In fact, I have to do one of those today.
Yeah. We're talking with Commander Matt Prouty and Police Chief Brian Kilcullen here on Catamount Community Connection. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned, I suppose the lack of desire for certain individuals to engage in the appropriate services to sort of help them navigate through their current conditions and their current situation. And I remember several months into COVID, after the program started, we did put together a meeting, and there were probably about 50 on it was a Zoom meeting to talk about that issue exactly, where our sense was sort of that the state sort of saw the need and threw this up to house individuals, and almost saw that as problem solved. But what we saw was that you had a significant number of individuals now housed in the hotels without any sort of resources or connection to those resources. And so we had asked for the state at that time to sort of staff what we call the resource desk for that reason exactly. Now, it really... There were some issues. I don't think it was terribly successful connecting individuals with the appropriate resources, partly because, as you said, there was no requirement that individuals engage in the appropriate resources. And this is around the time that we established our community resource specialist team, our CRSs. And so they've been a real, I think, a real value to those experiencing any of the issues we're talking about. So they've been, as I said, almost a real resource to connect people to the appropriate resources. We don't provide any direct resources that might be needed by anyone, in the city, but we're connecting. Our CRSs are connecting individuals to the appropriate resources. That's why they're called our community resource specialists. They're connecting individuals to the appropriate resources. As you mentioned, there was no requirement. There was sort of a light version of that where I forget the terms they use, but something like they have to engage in a meaningful way or something with the appropriate resources. And again, but there was no sanctions. It didn't seem like there were any sanctions. I could be wrong on that, but there didn't seem to be any sanctions if individuals didn't sort of follow through with what was with what was recommended. So it's certainly been. We've experienced a lot of frustration. I think that you sort of expressed. And to your point about individuals coming from out of state, that absolutely happened. Now, was it to a great extent? Maybe not, but it certainly has happened. I remember speaking with an individual who was from New Hampshire, was being housed, and said he came here specifically for that reason, because Vermont was putting individuals in hotels. Yep. So that's one individual out of a few hundred. There have been some, but I think for the most part, they have been, those who have been housed have been, sort of Vermont residents. But it did create the opportunity for individuals to come from out of state and avail themselves of the services Vermont was providing. Yeah.
The other thing that sort of gets lost sometimes, I think, is that not everybody that is being housed is, and I'll say a victim, if you will, of substance abuse. Some are. There's no question about that. But there are also single moms and kids that really have no other place to go and are not connected in any way with drugs. And they're sort of left forgotten in many ways. And I feel really badly for them. So I think it is incumbent on us to figure a way going forward, maybe to separate those two groups somehow and allow for a little bit more security and safety for folks that are not having substance abuse issues. So we'll see how things go. What else can I bring up here? I'm going to tiptoe very lightly into a political situation, and I hope I don't ask a bad question. By the time this airs, again, we won't have had the town meeting day yet. That's coming up. I think it's either March 4th or 5th, whatever that Tuesday is, first week in March. And there are going to be new members, I think, on both the Board of Aldermen and potentially the mayor's office. It may not eventuate in a change of administration. The current mayor, Mike Dunches, may be reelected, but it could be somebody else like Henriette coming in. I'm just kind of wondering, not that either of you need to take a position on that, and I realize you probably won't, but it is, I think, a little bit different. And as you go up the political ladder, it gets more and more obvious. If you have a change in governorships in a state, sometimes that does have effects down below. And certainly, as we've seen pretty recently in the federal elections for president, we have a whole new team. I mean, there's no question about that. Some people are absolutely out of their minds, not happy with it. Other people are okay with it, and other people are delighted. And there's probably enough people in each of those camps to make things hopefully go smoothly. But I didn't know if we do have a change, and you've been around kind of long enough to have seen some of the administration changes, does it really affect your police department when new people come in?
It certainly can. Everyone has their priorities, and some individuals who've been elected to office are more willing than others to spend money. And at least with respect to public safety, as public safety goes, so goes the city. Without public safety, it's difficult to encourage economic development and a lot of other things. I think so. Those who see the connection, the need to spend money for public safety, I think see the benefits in other ways, like having a sort of easier road towards economic development and some other things, but. And again, I'm not saying just throw money at things blindly, but I think again, as I said, I think it's important to public safety. As I said, public safety goes, so goes the city, so goes the state, and our officers are busy. In an urban environment like this, and again, everything's relative. I mean, we're a sizable city for Vermont, but a small city, across America. But our officers are incredibly busy. They really are. There are shifts when, and again, it's not all the time, but there are times when they are, for a good part of their entire shift, they're going from call to call. And without always bringing resolution to the issues that are brought to us. And again, which is why we created the CRS position. They've got the time to sort of bring resolution, to spend more time at this particular address that's sort of creating where chaos is occurring, not just in the household, but is extending beyond the household into the neighborhood. Our officers, though, again, are focusing on the sort of the criminal aspect of the calls that we're getting. As I said, they're busy, and as you know, staffing's been an issue for not just here in Rutland or in Vermont, but really across the country. We've had some success recently attracting individuals from other departments, and so hope to see the benefits of that in the next several months. But as I said, without the appropriate staffing, it's difficult to address the public safety issues that affect and impact so many other things in the city. And again, but to attract individuals, we've got to be competitive. There were over time. Every time we negotiate a new contract, the dynamic is different, and we're trying to address different things. And going back, say, 15 years in public safety, and again, my experience, as you know, is had been in New York for 20 some years, and I saw over time the different things that were being done, either at the legislative level, policy decision level, but going back more than 15 years ago, there were some changes to, say, a pension system, where prior to these changes, the pension calculation was all your earnings were considered towards your pension calculation. But again, it costs money. And at that time, it was easy to attract individuals into law enforcement, into the fire service, public safety. And so I think the legislators looked at that anyway, from what I saw, and said, we need to make some changes and sort of limit the earnings that go towards your pension calculation. Okay, now fast forward to today. Now that might have made sense when when it was easy to hire for fire, for police. Fast forward to today when it's not so easy. And I read a report recently from the Department of Justice, their COPS office, which is Community Oriented Police Services. So they produced a report called Recruitment and Retention in a Modern Law Enforcement Agency. And they talked about kind of exactly this, where a number of years ago, some changes were made when it was easy to attract, and you had to sort of have some cost-cutting measures. But fast forward to where we are now, and it's not so easy. And so things are starting to go the other way. What their suggestions were to consider changing those things that were changed 15 years ago, kind of going back the other way. Start looking at what goes into the pension calculation. Start looking at things like retiree health care. Those are the things that we need to do to recruit and retain individuals. Now, again, as I said, we've had some success recently to recruit. Now we've got to retain our employees. It's and again, these things cost money, but as I said, as public safety goes, so goes the city.
So I know we talked before about positions, and I don't remember exactly. You're still shy 5 or 6 officers somewhere in there?
So we just hired 4 individuals. Well, by next week, we'll have hired 4 in a very short period of time. And so we're about where our budgeted positions are close to where are close to being filled.
Okay.
But it's not to say we have all the positions we need. As I said, we mentioned the CRS positions. We created those a few years ago, and Matt was our first community resource specialist. He pulled him out of retirement. And,
I remember that.
Yeah, and he was our first, and we've got 3 now. So that's been a real help. We had typically been budgeted for about 41 positions, and going back probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I couldn't argue the point. We were considerably short-staffed, and so we were funding all those positions with maybe 10 or 15 openings. So was it realistic to fund all those positions, raise those tax dollars, put the burden on the taxpayer to fill those positions that we wouldn't realistically fill? And it was hard to argue that point. And so the board at the time committed to funding I think 32, but would let us continue to process candidates if we got to that 32. And so again, it's hard to argue that point. We're finally there. We're a bit above that now, and we're trying to get the positions back incrementally. But will we get back to the 41 that we once had? I don't know. As I said, we have the community resource specialists now. 25% of the calls that we respond to are not criminal nature. Not that they can handle all of those calls, but they handle a good portion of those calls. And I think what they do impacts in a positive way what our officers are doing out there every day. So will we get back there to 41? Maybe not. But we've made some good progress. Kudos to our recruitment team who've really had some good ideas to attract individuals. And we're trying to continue to recruit and retain. That's the second part of that, is retaining our employees. So we've done some good, and with the board support over the last several years and the mayor's support, we've done a lot of things to make what we offer more attractive. And so we've had some success in doing exactly that, but now we've got to continue to do that to retain, because it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle. You got to look at what other agencies are doing within the state, especially within the state, and unfortunately, we've got to continue to be competitive, because if we don't, we go back to where our staffing starts to plummet, and we can't provide the level of service our community deserves and expects.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up the pension, because I hadn't thought about that. A lot of times people will talk about salaries or benefits, and that makes a lot of sense, but I hadn't thought about the pension situation. I did sponsor a bill regarding veterans' pensions and the retirement there, and the ability of them to keep more of their money by not putting them into the income tax situation in the state. We're one of, I don't know if it's 4 or 5, depending on how you consider it, left that don't, or that do tax it, and so the great majority of states don't. And I haven't had great success in getting that bill off the wall, as they say, and on the floor. I think if we get it on the floor, I think it'll pass this time. but that's going to be the issue, is to get it off the wall in Senate Finance. And there's a companion bill in the House that Representative Bill Canfield from Fairhaven sponsored. So we're hoping that that's true. The argument that was made to me about not doing it was, well, gosh, if we do it for the veterans, we'll have to do it for the fire departments and the police departments. And my response was, great, I'd like to see everybody get a tax cut. It wouldn't bother me in the least. But I think that's also a bit disingenuous, because veterans, to me, are in a completely separate category. They fought for our freedom, and I don't think that's necessarily an argument that has any merit with me. So we'll see how things go. Okay, so we're talking to Rutland City Police Chief Brian Kilcullen, Commander Matt Prouty. We need to take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection, and we'll be back in just a moment. We're back on Catamount Community Connection, our weekly public affairs program here at Catamount Radio. I'm your host, Brian Collamore, and our show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846, and the 179th Fair. Well, when you look at it, it's only a few months away now. I mean, it's in August, so it'll be a lot warmer than it is now, but all of that to come for sure. Our guests today are Rutland Police Chief Brian Kilcullen and Commander Matt Prouty, and we talked during the break a little bit about another topic we can bring up, and I know this one's near and dear to your heart, Brian, the Neighborhood Stabilization Initiative. It's got a fancy title. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so, there are certain addresses in the city that create quite a bit of chaos for the neighborhoods they're located in. And those directly impacted are the neighbors. Things are brought to our attention, and we'll have a presence there for a period of time. And generally when we're there, things are quiet. But when we're not there, things aren't quiet. And so it's difficult for us sometimes to really bring some have a positive impact on the activity in situations like that. And so we had to formalize that sort of thing. And this was really organic, where a number of our officers in the department, both in patrol and in the detective division, said, look, we've got to take control of this particular neighborhood, this particular house, so the rest of the neighbors can have a peaceful existence, really. And so we sort of formalized that just recently. The mayor has committed, the cooperation amongst departments. Generally, we'll get the calls first for issues in a neighborhood, but we've got to leverage the building and zoning department. We've got to leverage DPW sometimes. We've got to leverage even places like departments like the rec, the fire department. So the mayor sort of formalized, has sort of established this, and we formalized this initiative. And so if you remember, we had some community meetings back in December, and one of the particular targets of this initiative was on Meadow Street, and some neighbors really directly impacted by what was going on at 27 Meadow, let's say it, came to the meeting and were very appreciative of the sort of the changes we brought to that neighborhood because of the efforts of, as I said, our patrol officers, our detectives, who got together with other departments within the city to bring some stability to this particular house and thereby bringing stability to the neighborhood. So that was one. And there have been a number throughout the city. Now, we've had more success with some than others. We certainly suspect, with the complaints that we're getting from a number of residents on certain houses, we suspect illegal activity. And so the first thing we do is do some surveillance, confirm the activity when we can, and go from there. We're not always as successful as we like to be. We have one particular address in the city that's been a real problem for us for quite some time. And a lot of this is well advertised. We had a case not long ago on East Ave, and it was reported in the paper as a result of an arrest on East that we were trying to target a different address and trying to identify individuals to work with us to target that address. So we need informants. We need help a lot of times. And so we approached an individual that we felt had quite a bit to lose. and to work with us, and it didn't happen. Well, ultimately, he became the target. But the house that we were initially looking at has been a problem for us for quite some time, and those directly impacted are the neighbors. As I said, it's unfortunate we haven't always been as successful as we'd like to be. In this particular house I'm referring to, we had executed search warrants at the house. We had done a lot of different things, but it's been a real problem for us. And so, as I said, we have to leverage every other department we possibly can. And ultimately, it's not always a criminal matter that sort of shuts a house down. And that's fine. That's fine with us, as long as we bring as long as we do shut it down and bring some stability to the neighborhood. That's fine with us. So again, as I said, this really started with our officers. The mayor committed to, the commitment of other departments, and we'll go forward with it.
So I assume, and maybe incorrectly, that many of the addresses are not owned locally. Now, maybe that's an unfair assumption on my part that somebody from someplace else has bought a house and then rents it out and really has no connection to the community sort of thing. It would be hard for me to imagine that somebody that actually lives here and could go by where they own and see all this sort of negative behavior going on and not feel badly about it, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's a mix.
It is. And going back more than 10, 12 years ago now, there are a number of houses where that was the case. There were a few houses that ultimately were seized through a civil process, through the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Justice. More recently, some of the houses that we're looking at now, a few of them are locally owned, but the individuals who own the houses are being exploited. They're vulnerable, being exploited, and they've been cooperative with us. So it's not like, again, the dynamic is different every time, but more recently, we've had a few cases where the individuals who were legitimately renting or owning the property were being exploited. And so in those cases, we've had the cooperation of those individuals, and we've had some success. But when it is when the homes are owner occupied and the owners or occupants are not willing to work with us, then it's a little more difficult for us.
Did you have something else to add, Matt?
Well, I was just that, to that point, it is a mixed bag, either from single family homes, owned locally, or even the rentals where it's a local landlord as compared to out of state. But yeah, we've really pulled out the stops. These are heavy lifts when we do the initiative, because it's once we start it's almost like a full court press for quite some time. So it's a lot that we're asking from our staff. We just did a detail the other night. We ended up having we leveraged some of the small towns to help us as well, and the HSI Homeland Security Investigations. But we ended up with almost 3 ounces of crack cocaine seized that night, a gun, 1.2 ounces of fentanyl, 8 arrests. So we're going to keep that up, but we're going to be very specific on the locations. Again, not every location is going to get this model applied. Right. Just out of capacity, we just don't have it. But when we can, we kind of do sort of an internal check of, okay, this location just will move to the top based off of this, and this.
So if someone's listening and they're suspicious of a particular location in their neighborhood, would you want them to just call you and say, hey, here's what I see on a daily or weekly basis, just putting it out there for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how we learn a thing sometimes. I mean, as I said, we'll focus on our 3-peat locations. But again, those lists are generated by phone calls. Right, so we need to know about these things. If we don't otherwise know about them, people need to call us. And so, as these calls come in, again, this initiative now is, as I said, formalized through our detective office, and a couple of our corporals up there are spearheading this and taking the lead on it and coordinating the efforts. And so, as I said, the first step then is for us to do some surveillance. So let's hear about what people suspect. And once we get the call, we do some surveillance, we confirm it, and go from there. So, yeah, we absolutely want to hear about those things.
Okay. Good. The other thing that we sometimes talk about when I have you on, and by the way, we're talking to Rutland Police Chief Brian Kilcullen and Commander Matt Prouty, also from the local PD, are legislative changes that are being anticipated. I look at them as increasing tools for both your community and the judicial system to use to bring stabilization and order to society, if you will. And I know the governor's had a very strong presence in this arena. He has proposed, and I don't know how familiar you both are with the raise the age provisions that are in statute right now, but may be changed as we go through the legislative process. So, this started, 4 or 5 years ago, where an individual reaches a certain age and is then considered an adult in most cases. But we've made it, and I think we're the only state that's gone as far as any other state in this regard. We've raised it every year. So, when I grew up, if you were 16, 17, certainly by 18, you knew what you were doing, and you had to know that there were consequences if you didn't do the right thing. Now it's 19 and even 20, and the aim, I think, of some of the folks in the legislature was to keep raising that to 25 or 26. I mean, at some point, I think there has to be a single age at which you're an adult. You can vote, you can take out a loan, you can drink, you can do a whole bunch of things. Right now, it's all over the place. You can't rent a car, but of course that's a private thing with the rental companies. But until you're like 26, I think. So I don't know where we are, but the governor wants to repeal the raise the age and push it back down again. And there are cases in very violent crime situations where even if you're at that age, that you are considered an adult when you get to court. So that was one of them. And there's other maybe smaller ones. If you're convicted of stealing a firearm, right now, unless that firearm is worth $900 or more, it's a misdemeanor. It's not a felony. There is a bill in House Judiciary that would lower that to just say any firearm. And there was something else, and it's escaping me right now what it was, but there'll be other ones coming. So I think we've begun to give you guys a little bit more of a tool chest to use, and certainly the judiciary too.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, I think, important to provide the tools. Now, not always appropriate to use, but have the tools anyway. And working with the state's attorney's office, the prosecutor, the determination's made what's appropriate to go forward with. So to have but without having the tool, it's certainly, a lot of times we feel like our hands are tied. Mm-hmm. I think the community sort of feels our frustration when the appearances that we're ineffective, and we are sometimes because of the tools that we have in the toolbox. And so to sort of add some tools, I think is a big plus. Yeah.
And certainly the judicial has come in for a lot of criticism. People talk about the catch and release thing all the time, and that it's the same, and I don't know what the percentage is, 70%, whatever it is. I think it's a little higher. A large majority of individuals continue to offend over and over and over again. And if they weren't around, and I won't say that in a bad way, but if you could change the behavior there, you guys would be a lot less busy answering a call after call after call, and the judge probably would be a little bit better, armed with those tools too, to say, look, this is the 15th, 16th, 25th time I've seen you. Mm-hmm. Here's what we're going to do, kind of thing.
Yeah, Brian. Chief and I have talked about this. There's this feeling that the court is not taken seriously at all. I mean, we've been in court over the years where the judge will talk about conditions of release, and if this happens again, this will happen. And literally at that time at the defendant's table, the defendant will say, "No, you won't.
Yeah,
you're not going to hold me,"
yeah.
and they don't. So, yeah, it's very frustrating. But look, we've seen this before. I'm hoping that this does come back. If you talk to your DCF workers right now, they are really struggling. They don't have a secure facility to bring some dangerous people.
Yep.
and so they're being watched in lobbies of police stations or at hotels, things like that. It's not sustainable. But look, at one point in time, anything over $100 on a retail theft was a felony, right? So that was changed. We dropped our felony rates in Vermont overnight. We made it an obnoxious number, $900. There was a time when they decriminalized driving on a suspended license. That might have been Peg Flory that authored that one, but we were able to get that back. And so, we're hoping that, a sense of reason will come in here. Of this is not good for us as a state.
The other thing that happened, and we've talked with Officer Rosario about this, that's on the other side of that, and I know, Brian, you've been in the courtroom before, is we used to call it drug court. I don't know, there's a fancier name for it now. We don't like a name, so we change it to make it something else, but it's drug court to me. And so there is a very clear sense of consequences if someone doesn't do what they said they do. And to me, we had a perfect judge with John Valenti, who it just has that real unique personality. He comes off as being very friendly and supportive and would say to somebody, okay, here's the deal. You do this and you do that and you do a urine test every week and we'll get you down there and we'll do it. Or if you don't, you're going to jail. And there was no discussion. And it seems to be very effective.
It is. And, the treatment court here, too, is, I try to go, it's every 2 weeks, and I try to go as often as I can. And it's amazing to see the progress. Yeah. To see people come in and see him graduate. It's absolutely incredible. And again, partly because of the interaction with the judge, with the whole treatment court team, between the state's attorney and the public defender and, the whole team. And I think we're still one of the only, or maybe the only, team that has a police officer assigned permanently to it. I think there are 4 treatment courts in the state.
Which having an officer is best practice.
Yeah, and so we get recognized for that. And I think that's why it's so successful here in Rutland. It's for that reason, that we do have a police officer. And the judge will mention that. The judge will talk about that all the time. And so I've been out in the car. Again, I try to go every 2 weeks. Doesn't always work. But I try to get out in the car, too, with Officer Rosario and then interact with the participants sort of on the street. And so it's kind of neat having that dynamic. You get to know the participants on a first-name basis. It's kind of neat, and it's had some real success. But you're right. If the participants don't uphold their end of the bargain, there are sanctions, and they're aware of it going in. But it's really nice to see the graduations. You see them just progress through. Some are quicker than others, and it's nice to see them come out the other end in graduation.
Hard process.
Yeah,
people
no question.
I talk to folks often, and they think, they have an assumption of what it's like. It's actually very difficult. Especially, some of the challenge people are facing going in there. And if you fail out, you go to sentencing on your underlying charge. Yeah. You don't get to go have your jury trial after that. You pled to get in there. Yeah. And so they have a lot at stake.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I think there is some capacity for more participants, but that's a big part of, I think, what we're talking about is the capacity. So the court system doesn't seem to have the capacity to get everyone through in a timely manner. And that's the other issue. You've got the repeat offenders who are not sort of being held accountable timely. And it's not the judge's fault. It's not the prosecutor's fault, public defender's fault, but it's capacity. And so we talked, I think we mentioned it before too, about looking at other ideas about potentially having a night court or but I think they've got a hard stop at 4:00. So there is certainly the need. I know they're and not just at the judiciary, but I was reading an article recently. I think. Maybe Orleans County, how they lost their contract with the law firm that provides the public defender services. So the system doesn't work if there's a breakdown in one aspect, one component of it. And it's, but again, I think that at least here, the capacity of the court to handle all the cases is doesn't meet the need. And our hope was that could be looked at.
So you mentioned that sort of personal relationship that develops, and I think it was Officer Rosario that sort of in 20 words or less put it into perspective. And he said, there was a time when that same individual would run away from me, and now he runs towards me, or she. And, that really does capture the change in behavior, I think. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, it's great, the dynamic that's created as a result of having him on the team.
Yeah. All right, we need to take our second break here on the program. We're talking with Rutland City Police Chief Brian Kilcullen and Commander Matt Prouty from the police department as well. And we'll take a break and be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. Our guest this week, Rutland City Police Chief Brian Kilcullen and Commander Matt Prouty, who was the original person on Project Vision. I didn't mention that earlier. And then tried to retire, but we threw a lasso out there and got him back. So he's now in charge of the, is it CRS, Community Response?
Yeah, so those are our community response, resource specialists,
yeah.
But it's part of the community response team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, if you look back, and I'm a big fan of history, and you look at the state of Vermont before the interstates. So at one point, like a big road in Vermont was Route 7, which was a north-south one. And there really wasn't one on the other side, over on the east. I guess Route 5 and 12 and up that way were the biggest roads there were. And then we had Interstate 89 come in, and 91, I think almost within a 10-year period. And I think things changed dramatically. And now we have a situation where, especially on the eastern side, 91, because it does connect with, rather large urban areas like Springfield, Massachusetts, and Hartford, Connecticut, it is possible for people to move quickly from point A to point B. And I know it has to have, there's an intersection there with kind of illegal activity that goes on all the time. But when we were off the air just chatting with Matt, you mentioned something that really made me think, wow, I didn't think about it in those terms, that firearms have become a commodity of sorts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They sure have. So there's a criminal element out there that wants our guns. They really want our guns. And they'll trade it for dope, straight up, for drugs. So when we've had a lot of handgun thefts here in Vermont, out of cars, houses, whatever, we recovered a handgun just this last week. And it's scary, and they're ending up in the city. And it's not uncommon for us to get a call from a Massachusetts department or a New York City precinct saying, hey, we've recovered one of your handguns down
Okay,
here.
And then trace it with serial number, yeah. And I didn't mean to imply that the interstates were necessarily all bad. I mean,
they're kind of handy, Brian.
It did provide some economic growth for people, too. But I think that the structure and the culture of Vermont changed drastically in the 60s because of that. And, it's just another challenge, I guess, that folks face from day to day, right? Like everything else.
Sure.
We have about 5-6 minutes left. I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to bring up that we haven't touched on yet. We talked a lot about the staffing situation. We didn't get into the sort of, and I call it poaching, but maybe that's a little strong term. And I didn't mean that you taking people in was bad. I meant more like maybe the next level up. The state police have certainly a little bit more of a thing to offer. Some people out of state agencies can probably do a little bit better job. I'm not sure where we stand with like Mass, New Hampshire, and New York. Are they paying people better over those ways?
At the state level, salaries are significantly higher. Some of the smaller departments, certainly in New York, I think we're competitive with.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of the bigger departments, maybe not so much. But again, it comes down to resources, and that's that's what we have to look at here too. I mean, we can't realistically compete with the state police. The funding comes from the state budget, from state taxes. Right.
Yeah.
Where here, everything's funded really on the backs of the taxpayers. the property taxpayers. And so it's a little bit more difficult for us, but the need still exists to be able to be competitive, to be able to recruit and retain, so we can provide the level of service that our community expects and deserves. Yeah. So that's the difficulty we have. But I think, and again, it ebbs and flows, right? You're competitive for a while, and then other areas, the contracts start to come up, and they negotiate different things. So it's not hey, we're going to fix it today forever. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. We might have we might be in a good position, at any given time, but it changes fairly quickly, unfortunately.
The other ingredient seems to me. We compare ourselves sometimes to Burlington. I think they're in a much more tenuous position than we are here. And a lot of that has to do with the community support or lack thereof. They have gone through, and I'm not sure they're not still going through. They have a rather progressive mayor in office right now. And, they went through the whole defund police piece, and it just seems like Rutland is a little bit different and better that way.
No, I agree 100%. We're incredibly fortunate here that we have the support of the community. We have the support of our elected officials. Because without that, we'd be in a situation, I think, like Burlington, where they're severely understaffed, where they were typically budgeted for and had about 100 officers over kind of a fairly regularly would have about 100. I think the number I heard was 96. They were typically budgeted, and again, this was when Chief Del Pozo was there, would talk about that where they were typically budgeted for like 104, would have about 96, and always have a few openings, but now they're in the 60s. And I don't even know if that is just available staff or total staff, because a lot of times you might have 60 on staff, but there might be a number out on sort of long-term injuries, that sort of thing. So, as I said, I'm incredibly appreciative for the community, for our elected officials that support the department, because that's a big part of the ability to recruit and retain. Yeah. And I hate to see sort of another town, another city experience departures, but it's sort of nice to be at the receiving end of that.
The other thing that scared me, and maybe I misread it, the Burlington police station, one of the officers suggested they put a fence around it because of the violence that was going on, like in their parking lot sometimes. And then the other thing, which I really disagreed with, and I'll be very open about that, the mayor putting, in essence, a gag order on the police chief up there. I just don't understand how that's beneficial in any way.
I agree.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot about that.
Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I know. It's just, boy, oh boy.
I think our structure is different, too, than the mayor police chief relationship in Burlington as compared to with the police commission and
yeah.
But the police chief there, I'm not sure how closely you follow law enforcement, policing in America, but the chief there had come from New York City and worked for Bill Bratton. Now, again, I might not have this entirely right, but when Bill Bratton came back, Bill Bratton was a public safety commissioner in Boston, New York, L.A., and then back to New York. And when he came back the second time to New York, he asked his, I forget what rank it was, lower management, for an assessment of the department, and received those assessments and saw one that he was incredibly impressed with. That individual, my understanding, was promoted 5 ranks.
Wow.
And that individual was the current chief in Burlington. And when Bill Bratton left New York, the chief, John Murad, had left with him and worked with his global consulting company, and then it ended up in Burlington. So he's got incredible credentials.
Yes.
Harvard educated, incredible police credentials, and it's unfortunate that they're losing him.
Yeah, and again, it was avoidable. People did vote the way they voted in Burlington, and if they wanted to elect this person as mayor, great. I'm glad I don't live there. I know that. But, I often marvel at how good our officers are in Rutland City. I don't know how anybody would ever want to become a police officer sometimes because, you don't ever seem to get legitimate thanks for what you do, and the pay is okay, but it's not great. I mean, people could do a lot of other things if they wanted to. So
sure, and you're right. I try to get out on the street here and there, and it's amazing the patience the officers have. And they, thinking back to my career, being new, 30 some years ago, and I'd see some of the individuals had been on the job quite some time and really had a short fuse, and that was almost acceptable back then. But what you have to do today, it's amazing to see the officers that are doing this every day, the patience they have, individuals out there trying to wind you up. And our officers, it's amazing, the demeanor they have. So kudos to them, because if I had to do it every day out in the street, I don't know if I could.
Yeah. Well, we got body cams now, which we didn't have a few years ago, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it keeps everybody a little more accountable than they might have been at one time. But I rarely see any sort of bad stuff happening when there's interaction between the public and the police. So thank you guys for what you do. I really do appreciate it. I think most people do, and maybe we're just quiet about it. Again, I like seeing those signs, those lawn signs that go up that police are supporting. Yeah,
and still see them out there. They've been up now for a couple of years, so we appreciate that. Well,
we are at the end of our show this week, and again, I want to thank Rutland Police Chief Brian Kilcullen for coming in, and Commander Matt Prouty. Any closing shot at anybody or anything? Or we're just going to close the mics and go our way, I guess, right?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Our show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society. Don't forget the Vermont State Fair at Rutland coming up with our big one. It's 179 years old this coming year. So get to the fair and enjoy it. And we will see all of you next week here on Catamount Community Connection.